Welcome to the XY Advisor Podcast, a global community of financial advisors sharing and learning with one another to drive the positive evolution of financial advice. To get involved, go to xyadvisor.com or simply download the XY Advisor app. This series is brought to you by Super Guardian, a specialist self-managed super fund administrator known for their client-centric approach to their full-service solution. If you need SMSF support or CPD, check out the Knowledge Centre or sign up for Super Guardian updates at superguardian.com.au. Welcome back to the XY Advisor Podcast. I'm Fraser Jack, and today we are exploring all things self-managed super funds, and I'm joined by Tracey Scotchbrook from the Self-Managed Super Fund Association. Welcome, Tracey.
Hi, Fraser. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for hanging out with us today and chatting about all things self-managed super funds.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Now, give us. Now, we might start with a quick overview of you and just your position in the Self-Managed Super Fund Association.
Yeah, so I've been quite fortunate to work in the SMSF sector for quite a long time, and I won't put a number on it because it gives a little bit too much away. But I was quite fortunate. I started as a tax accountant originally and had that original sort of business services, that broad-based tax and accounting experience that also included some exposure to self-managed super fund. And there was just a natural gravitation to it. I found it really interesting because it was just so different to the other typical tax and accounting work. And more through good luck than design, my career took me on a pathway where the opportunities seemed to expand on the self-managed super fund front till it came to a point where I was really at a crossroads and needed to make the decision, did I wish to continue as a business service accountant or move into the self-managed super fund space. And fortunately, it's when I first encountered some members of the Self-Managed Super Fund Association, or SPA as it was known way back then, who were some fantastic mentors for me and got me on the pathway to specialisation and put me on the pathway to my career to take me to today. And I've been a bit of a hybrid of an accountant and a financial advisor since about 2010. There was a lot of talk back then around the removal of the accounts exemption and the shift in licensing, and so I took the opportunity to dive into that advice base because it just provided so many more opportunities to have those strategic conversations with clients. So I've kind of straddled the two worlds as an accountant and an advisor, and never really sure what to call myself other than an SMSF specialist. And had a great relationship with the association, and have been fortunate enough to join the team in April this year as the policy manager. So which has been a really exciting opportunity, quite different to public practice, but really loving it, being able to sink my teeth into some of those meaty consultation papers and things. It's been quite a busy time since coming on board.
I just love the fact that you nerd out about the idea of getting your teeth sunk into a policy paper, which is incredible.
That's it. Yep.
Now I'll just touch on this conversation too around the idea of advisors and accountants both being in the space. There is a bit of an overlap in some ways. There can be confusion over who's doing what at some points. There can be a double up. There can be conversations from all sides of conversation around TPB membership, tax accounting. Is it a tax job? Is that an advisor's job? How do you see all that sort of settling? I mean, obviously there's sort of I feel like it's a bit of a mindset too. Sometimes there can always be a bit of a conflict there.
Yeah, I agree that whole mindset concept. The approach I've always taken has been around collaboration, and collaboration was a core part of my practice when I was in practice prior to joining the association. And those relationships, I think, across the professions are essential. particularly when you look at issues around, for example, access to information from the tax agents portal. So total super balances for members, what's their transfer balance cap, what are their contribution caps, have they got bring forward concessional contribution cap amounts, how much is it? That level of reporting is really vital for the advisors, for the advice that they're giving, but they don't have ready access to that, whereas a tax accountant does through the tax agent portal. So that's where that relationship is really important, as well as on an execution level as well. So to make sure there's no doubling up, I've seen scenarios where things have gone astray, where that communication piece hasn't worked so well, and there's been advice around contributions on one side and advice on the other, and then there's ended up being a double up, and the poor client in the middle is really not really understood that there was an issue there. So collaboration is such an important piece, I think, in this space for sure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think all of the professionals working in the space need to understand that from a very concept down there. They have to go, well, yes, this is my client, but it's the client of these other people as well, these other professionals, and we all need to work together. If we're not working together in a harmonious way, then we shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, exactly. Because another example of that where the tax accountants really play an important role can be around the tax planning and what happens where you've got clients in pension mode and perhaps there's a mixture of accumulation, different scenarios playing out. And for the advisor wanting to do particular pension strategies or selling of assets, it's important that there's good co-work that goes on to make sure that there's not any unexpected adverse outcomes. Sometimes strategies look good on paper when it comes to execution, what it's going to cost versus to execute versus the benefit doesn't always work out. So that's another situation where I see that whole collaboration piece is really, really important to get that right outcome ultimately for that shared client.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a really interesting space it's a mindset that you have to come into. So
absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic. Now tell us about the association. It's obviously been fairly strong for a long time, and yes. It does a lot of work. And I think, yes, as policy manager, you do a lot of work in the advocacy space.
Correct, yeah. So the association was originally born out of a need because SMSFs were under threat at the time, and a core group of people came together to form the association to advocate and effectively save the sector. And so it was born on a very strong platform of advocacy and policy, and certainly our CEO, John Moroney, and Deputy CEO and Head of Technical and Education, Peter Burgess, do a lot of work in speaking with the key people in Canberra, whether it's Treasury ministers. So those relationships and conversations are really very, very important to the work that we do. And for myself, it's consulting with members and putting together those responses to the various bills and consultation papers that come from a variety of sources, whether it's through Treasury, ATO, ASIC, Prime Minister and Cabinet. There's quite a variety of sources of where this consultation process actually occurs. So that's really quite interesting. But it's always had a strong platform. And the other thing I think that's important is that the fact that the SMSF Association actually represents a broad base of members. So we've got key professionals from different groups. So whether it's accountants, auditors, financial advisors, actuaries, lawyers, hopefully I haven't missed anybody there, but it's anybody who is a professional working in that space. It comes back to what we were talking before about collaboration. I think SMSFs are very much about collaboration because all of these professions are needed at various different times and need to work together. So it's really interesting from that perspective when you've got such a melting pot of different professionals and representing their interests.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you think about that specialisation conversation. On obviously we've had specialisation conversations. You can specialise in a particular type of client or a particular product or a particular demographic, all those types of things. Yep. I guess it's very clear that self-managed super fund is what you're specialising in for all the people that work in and around that space.
Correct.
Now,
And importantly, considering the trustees in that mix as well.
Yeah, that's a really important point. The trustees have to be represented.
Yes.
How do you describe a self-managed super fund? Is this a strategy or a product, or where are we sitting in this space?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think it's all of those things. I think it's a product because of the nature of it, and whilst it's viewed as a structure, I think there's so many moving parts and components to it that make it a product. So when you start talking about contributions and then underlying investments, pensions themselves being a separate product. So yes, it's a structure. That's the wrapper, but inherently all the moving parts are sort of falling into that sort of product side of it. Certainly a lot of strategic advice involved, also a lot of product advice. So again, the need for the broad range of professionals.
Yeah, okay. So we're sort of putting it into the three buckets: the strategy, the product, and the strategy, product, and the structure. Okay, very good. Tell me about the association. So your role is to really work with these in the policy space, working with government, working with other associations, I guess, and all the stakeholders.
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of active engagement that goes on an ongoing basis with the various professional bodies, so FPA, Chartered Accountants, IPA, CPA, lots of ongoing conversations, which is fantastic. They're great working relationships. And where possible, it means that where there's alignment, we can actually issue statements or consult jointly, which helps to deliver better outcomes. Yep.
So that a lot of that conversation takes place, obviously, before you make a statement.
Oh yes, and the association has been involved with a number of joint statements, either to the media, or whether it's joint letters to a minister or ATO. So there's a good working history there amongst the professional bodies, which is great.
Yeah, fantastic. And obviously a big part of what you're doing is the idea of a specialisation, or being able to say that these members are specialising in self-managed super funds.
Yeah, correct. And it is a complex area, and some people may be aware of SMSF and understand some of the fundamentals, but when it comes to some of those moving parts in the strategy, I think that's where the specialisation is key. There's so many compliance rules that need to be navigated, and from a strategic point of view, there's so many different options. So it's looking at what's going to be the best option for the client, and I think that's where the specialisations really adds value and so important.
Yep. Now you mentioned trustees, and this is intriguing because I haven't really thought about this, but is that something that could a trustee be a member of the association?
So not as a member, but they do have a website called SMSF Connect, which is directly targeted at a trustee audience. So it's somewhere that trustees can go to seek out information, access articles and various other tools, checklists, little videos. It's quite a good resource, and it's one that advisors can use as well if they're looking to find an education source or an information source for clients. They can access the information for free. They just need to create a login, and then they've got free access to the resources that are available there. That's really the position I think the association has taken, is that rather than a member, it's about making sure that we're providing information out to that trustee market as a source of truth, I suppose. And because there's a lot of misinformation, as we know, that happens out there and on social media and various other locations, at least this is a central hub that they can come to and access various pieces of information. There's even little mini courses. So for those that are really wanting to get in and sink their teeth in as trustees and learn a bit more, or those that are thinking about self-managed, they can sink their teeth into these little mini courses as well, which are really great. Yeah, really engaging.
Fantastic. And we'll just grab that the URL for that again. What was that one?
It's smsfconnect.com.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Now let's have a chat about some of the you and I spoke before about some of the costs and the research around this. And obviously there's been some different sort of papers put out, obviously in 2013, ASIC sort of came out with a mention around costs of running a self-managed super fund and how much money should be somebody should have to start making it affordable in bunny ears, I guess you could say. And of course, that's no longer around anymore. That paper.
Yeah, so Rice Warner did some research with ASIC back in 2013, and that's when we started to see that sort of rule of thumb, that benchmark around that $200,000 mark for when SMSFs became cost effective compared to having an APRA fund. And then in 2019, ASIC issued a fact sheet, which was essentially saying it was going to cost $13,500 to run an SMSF. They're not economical below $500,000. And it caused quite a bit of controversy at the time. Funnily enough, I know some advisors out there that actually, whilst the content of the fact sheet was controversial, they actually saw this as an opportunity because their clients were looking at it going, wow, our SMSF doesn't cost us anywhere near that amount. And we don't have 500,000. So it actually, whilst it was perceived negatively, it also provided for some interesting conversations. And I think it did spark some good conversations around, well, what does an SMSF actually cost? And I think the key takeaway, I think, from all of this discussion around the ASIC fact sheet and then the research that has flowed later from Rice Warner that they did in association with the SMSF Association, is that you've got to look at what the costs are, and I guess the value prop for an SMSF is their uniqueness in the fact that my SMSF is going to be completely different to your SMSF and what you're doing with it and why. It's that no two super funds generally are going to be exactly the same. So they're quite a different product position compared to other SMSFs. So I think it sparks some really good conversations around what does it cost, but what's it going to cost me with what I plan to do, and is it appropriate for me? Of course, cost is only just one part of the conversation on whether an SMSF is appropriate, and there's certainly a number of other reasons that people do look to an SMSF, and where the cost may not necessarily be the overriding decision point. For example, specialist estate planning, where you've got a little bit more flex and control with things that you can do versus one of the large APRA funds. So I've seen a number of scenarios where that's been necessary, and people have been able to forward plan that they've had time because they've had long, perhaps a degenerative illness. They've been able to put things in place and then put plans in place to make sure that their children are looked after, and it just provided greater flexibility than what they could have achieved elsewhere. So you've got to weigh that up, I guess, with what's happening in that client's specific circumstance.
Yeah.
What was really interesting with the Rice Warner research that came out late last year is it showed that 200,000 sweet spot is still there. So certainly you are going to be in front cost-wise, broadly speaking, from that $200,000 mark and above. What was interesting, though, is with the improvements in technology and some of the time and processing efficiencies and lead to cost efficiencies, we now see around about that $150,000 mark. We're looking at some cost parity between the SMSF and the APRA funds. So we're starting to see it come down in terms of the cost dynamics, and technology has had a huge part to play in that.
Yeah, well, we'll get into some technology in a second. So this cost, as you know, these cost figures, is interesting. The 13,500, where that sort of came from. I guess that's sort of taking into a lot of the specialist estate planning setups, all the different professionals involved around the outskirts of this setting up and those sorts of things. Was that way over budgeted, or is it was that accurate?
So I think what it was is the data from the ATO was perhaps used in an incorrect manner. So we saw things like establishment costs and things like that wrapped into that annual cost. And I think that's where it sort of fell over a little bit. It's just that it's the data that it came from was fine, but how it got kind of packaged together just didn't quite work. So the establishment costs, of course, are a sunk upfront cost. I always have likened it to thinking it rather than as an initial upfront cost. What if we amortize that over the life of the fund? How long are you planning to have that fund for? So typically the 10 years, 20, 30, depending on how old someone is, of course, when they start the fund. But they're expected to be around for a long time. So those setup costs, whilst, yes, they're there and they're a sunk cost, really, when you look at that over the life of the fund, they're quite low.
Yeah. And we really should be talking about the life of the fund, shouldn't we? Not just the setting up, as in the life of the fund, the winding up cost as well as the setup costs, and obviously that it sort of has a barbell effect at each end, right? A lot at the beginning, a bit at the beginning, a bit at the end, and less in the middle.
Yeah, and look, the wind-up cost is a really great point that you make there, and I think more and more advisors need to be incorporating conversations with those around wind up, with those initial conversations that they're having with clients, so before they embark on an SMSF, just to make them aware, because often people don't realise the work and perhaps some costs that might go into the winding up of the fund. And depending on how the fund is invested, there may be some transactional costs. So particularly if you've got property, time and cost to realise that, to then be able to roll your funds over. A lot of trustees don't understand that process. They've never had a self-managed fund, so of course they're not going to. But they just think, oh, well, if I decide I don't want this anymore, I can just pick this up and move it over there. But it's not quite that simple a process. And I've found where it's not really been an SMSF's not really been appropriate for clients. When you start introducing, just as I guess is the psychology of working with clients, when you start talking about, well, be aware if this isn't for you or you decide to wind up, this is what you're going to have to go to and this is what the cost is going to be, suddenly the realisation hits home that, okay, this is probably a little bit too complex and not really effective for me, and it's a nice, easy way to kind of manage that conversation piece. But I think it's critical to have that awareness up front so that people really genuinely understand what they're getting into. Because it's not the sort of thing to set up, run for a couple of years, and then wind up and move on. Like there will be some cost leakage, in that process. It's got to be a longer term strategy.
Yep. So definitely not a short term strategy. But do you? No. I guess it's pretty interesting to consider some of the stats around this as well. To say, well, a lot of people would. Start up and finish it off in a short amount of time, but then a lot of people would continue on for a longer period of time. And this is understanding the client situation to say, like, well, this is going to be a 15-year or 20-year or 17-year or 5-year, or whatever it might be, plan.
Yeah, exactly. And interestingly enough, I think it's 45% of the current population of SMSFs have been around for 10 years or more.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting to obviously bring those stats into the conversation when looking at setting one up.
Absolutely.
Now let's get into some of the technology, because I love technology, but also the fact that it is bringing the cost to administer down. Yes. Obviously, some of it may not be in this initial setup or cost of the professionals, but certainly in the administration of it ongoing. Tell us about how sort of data feeds and even machine learning has changed. What we're doing over time.
Yeah, so we've seen a real revolution in the administration software that is available for accountants and administrators. We've had bank data feeds available for a while now, but with the new generation of administration products and the way these data feeds flow into it, and pardon, I'm far from an IT expert, so I can't sort of go into the nitty gritty for the technophiles out there, but certainly they're far more efficient the way that they feed into this new generation of software, and there's greater access to other information from various platform providers as well. So in terms of getting the managed portfolios, the share trading accounts, having those contracts actually feed into the software system as well. And so what we have now in these systems is the ability to read transactions and to read share trading contract notes that come through. They can actually read and interpret that information. So whether it's a narrative for a transaction on a bank account or the key pieces of information in that contract, and it can read, interpret, and then process and allocate those particular transactions. So there's quite a bit of automation that starts to come into play, and with that there is machine learning that's coming into these systems as well, which is adding to greater efficiency. So they're learning that, if you've got a regular contribution that's coming from a particular employer that belongs to this particular member, it's able to then recognise automatically that this is relating to that particular individual. So this has really created quite a lot of efficiency around the administration. It's minimising the manual transaction processing that used to happen quite a bit. Poor old accountants be getting a file at the end of the year with all the bank statements, all the contract notes, and having to manually process all of these into the system, whereas this happens automatically. It's happening on a sort of almost live basis as well, which is just brilliant, I think, particularly for advisors who are needing access to information in a more real-time basis rather than 12, 18 months after the fact. So the fact that this information does come through on a daily basis, typically pushes through overnight. It's not fully live, but it's getting pretty close. So that's really powerful, because that information is so important and can also drive the advice process. It also provides for strategic opportunities, because you can see what's happening and what's coming through the system, what clients are doing, and perhaps head off at the pass if somebody looks like they're going to be heading to, say, excess contribution territory. So it allows for a lot more proactive engagement with clients as well, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it certainly is. I mean, it sounds really exciting. I know you're absolutely right. The proactiveness of that, of getting in front of anything that's likely to cause a problem is amazing. How do you see this developing over time? Because I'm imagining there's a lot of assets out there that trustees might be getting involved in. Let's talk about blockchain style products or whatever it might be, online, and obviously those transactions are pretty important as well to try and get those in accurately.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, can't provide any insights onto to blockchain. That's sort of not my foray. But you're right. It's this, I think, is the tip of the iceberg, and Bitcoin doesn't, or all those different crypto products don't seem to be going away anytime soon. And I think every day you pick up the paper, there seems to be an article about something that's happening in that space. So I think clearly there will be something that will emerge, you would think, in that space going forward. How that fits in with the access keys and the security protocols, that'll be an interesting one. But clearly that will be, I think, the next step, the next challenge for the software providers who are always looking for that cutting edge advantage.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think obviously the systems, even from the taxation system, the portals that are available, all those sorts of things will start be getting one-touch uploads and all those sorts of things, so that they can know where they're up to, and you can get sort of real, not just data feeds from the product providers and the numbers, but both ways, as in coming from the portals.
Yeah, exactly. That would be fantastic, and that would make life a whole lot easier, I think, for a lot of people. Yes.
Very good. And so I guess that's an interesting space to watch and see how that goes. And obviously that, as you mentioned, is driving the ongoing costs of the administration costs down.
Absolutely.
Now, tell us about corporate trustees. I mean, this is a subject that we're talking about cost, and often there's a mindset that a corporate trustee is additional cost at the beginning. You've got some different ideas and opinions on that.
Yeah, look, corporate trustees, I think, are essential for a number of reasons, and certainly sometimes people are concerned because it is an additional cost. Ask, is it necessary? And I always like to position it as it's a kind of an insurance policy, and that's for a number of reasons. Firstly, if there's ever a need to change trustees, when you've got a corporate trustee, that always happens at the director level. So when we have individual trustees, if we're wanting to add or remove someone as a member of the fund, they also need to come in or out as a trustee of that fund. So that, as a part of that process, the lawyer would need to do a deed of amendment to reflect that change in trustee. But also what that means, because there's been a change in trustee, it'll impact the bank accounts, and often it's not just a case of changing the title. It will often require new bank accounts, new CHESS trading accounts, if there's property, updating the titles on property and so forth. So, it can be done, but it's a bit of work to do, and sometimes a little bit of cost involved and time as well. Now, if you think of it in the context of someone, we've got a family member who's seriously ill, perhaps has a loss of capacity, and they're unable to act as a trustee of the fund. So an enduring power of attorney is stepping in to be the trustee of the fund on their behalf. As an individual trustee structure, the last thing you want to be worrying about is all this extra admin and cost. You want to be focused on the family member. So from an administration point of view, it's a case of working through what the deed and the corporate trustee rules require in terms of appointing that person as the trustee or the director of the trustee company, and removing that other person so that they can act. So that can be a lot of peace of mind. But as I mentioned too, it's the cost of changing everything. So anytime that you've got any changes, there will be some administration costs that are involved with it. So I think to do that up front, it just absolutely makes sense. It also makes sure that your SMSF assets are protected. So under the superannuation law, that you have an obligation as a trustee to keep your assets, the super fund assets separate from your own. So if you've got your own name appearing on the title of assets, you need to make sure that they're kept properly separate from your personal assets, and that can be challenging sometimes, particularly when we look at land titles. So I'm in WA. Here on the land titles, it only shows the trustees' names. So it'll only have the individual names. So if you have a special purpose corporate trustee, that company name will appear on there, and it's clear that it is a super fund asset. So the last thing you want to be doing is trying to defend super fund assets if there's ever any disputes or litigation or anything like that happening, which we think will never happen to us, but unfortunately when it does happen, it can become quite messy and complicated. The other thing too is that if the company is registered as a special purpose SMSF trustee company, the ASIC annual return fees are significantly lower to a normal proprietary limited company. So they're $55 a year. But what a lot of people don't realise is you can actually do an election and pay up to 10 years up front. And in doing so, you get a discount. So you pay less than, it's just under 7 years worth of fees based on the current rate. So you're insulating yourself against fee increases, and you get a discount for paying it up front. And plus, it's just one less thing to worry about. So it's one way of saving money over the life of the fund as well that a lot of people don't know about.
Oh, fair enough. There you go. I didn't know about that either. So there you go. You can prepay your ASIC fees and save a few dollars. Yeah.
So there's a special purpose form. Best way is just to Google it, and then it'll take you to the right place on the ASIC webpage. And there's just a form that then you need to fill in, send in the payment, and that's it.
Yeah, very good. Now, also, there's a bit of an advantage too when it comes to if you do actually suffer any fines for the trustees.
Yeah, absolutely. So the ATO has powers to issue administrative penalties against trustees, and these are levied per trustee. So if they make a finding that there's been a breach, each of the trustees will be penalised. So if you've got 2 individual trustees, that's 2 times the penalty, 1 each. If you've got 4 individual trustees, that's 4 times, because each of those 4 individuals will be levied a penalty. In the case of a company, whilst you could have more than one director, the trustee is actually the company. So there's only one penalty to flow through. And look, people, of course, are wanting to avoid penalties because they all want to do the right thing, but sometimes things can go wrong when you least expect it. So at least that's one way of minimising some future costs should something go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. It's not something that you want to be aiming for, but
of course not.
It's just something to keep in mind, I guess.
Absolutely, correct.
Very good. Now, tell us about the future. You're doing a lot of work with the association, obviously in the process of setting up a single disciplinary body. How's that going?
Yeah, so there was a consultation paper that was a draft bill that was put out for comment, and the association has put its submission in. So the single disciplinary body is looking to make ASIC that single place for regulation for financial advisors. So it will be the disciplinary body. So they're looking to expand the role of the Financial Services Credit Panel, so the FSCP, and that will hear disciplinary matters and be able to issue sanctions from written warnings right through to the broader end of the spectrum. It also means that ASIC will have a broader range of powers around penalties. So probably the best comparison that I've heard, which I thought was great, so I'm going to steal it, is the comparison to the trustee penalty regime that was introduced with the ATO, that provided the ATO broader powers to issue those administrative penalties we were just talking about a moment ago. Because prior to that, the only option they had was to make a fund non-complying. So it was going through that court process and that non-compliance. So you're talking the very extreme end of when things go wrong, but there was nothing that sat in the middle to be able to educate, reorientate, and to, I guess, rectify things before we get to that really extreme end of the penalty spectrum. And this is really what the new ASIC powers are about. It's adding that broader suite of powers rather than going straight to banning orders. Other components of the bill will be, of course, well talked about winding up of FASEA. So the administrative functions of FASEA will be moving into ASIC, and then those legislative framework powers will go to the minister. So going forward from 1 January 2022, if the bill is passed, we'll see ASIC administering the exam and all of those types of functions. So the good news is they've made provisions in there for the education that has already been accredited, including the foreign education that they've approved for people with their relevant degrees. That will all roll and fold into ASIC, so which absolutely makes sense. And then we've got the move to annual advisor registrations. Really interesting how it was positioned is that they positioned it that the AFSLs would be responsible for registering the individuals, but the individual would have to make a fit and proper person declaration as a part of the process. And it just seemed like a lot of additional admin. And one thing that we advocated for in our response to the bill was that, look, this really should be an individual obligation. Let's cut out the middleman and just have it just between the advisor and ASIC. And I think that brings it in line with other professions as well. When you look at lawyers, accountants and so on, that individual registration process. And then the last piece of the puzzle is around the Tax Practitioners Board, the Tax Financial Advisor registration. So it'll move from TPB into ASIC. Now, I know this has caused some people concerns where they've recently done their renewals, they've paid their fees, worried about, am I going to get reimbursed? What will happen is your registration period will continue. It'll just transfer from TPB to ASIC. And when your renewal falls due as it ordinarily would, you'll then renew with ASIC within the new system going forward. One area of concern we did raise was around those advisors who have qualified for tax financial advisor registration under the years of experience and holding a relevant professional body registration to make sure that they are properly catered for under transitional measures. Everyone, of course, will have to meet the education standards by 1 January 2026, but people who are still completing their education need that time to do so. So we've just highlighted that there's a need to make sure that there's good, clear transitional measures to make sure those people can still do the work, essential work that they are doing. So that was quite a big body of work, and it'll be interesting to see the response when the final bill is ultimately released.
Yeah, it is. It's been a moving piece of the puzzle for a long time. It's been difficult, but when I think about FASEA and the Tax Practitioner Board, they generally spoke about the individual advisor being as a human being, and the company, the corporate. And obviously when you register with the Tax Practitioner Board, you register your corporate and you also register you as a human.
Yes.
This now forming under ASIC, it seems a bit funny to me because ASIC are obviously a corporate, they regulate corporations, and obviously it's all in the Corporations Act we're talking about. How are they going to be able to regulate individuals?
Yeah, so there's provisions that are being made. So they're removing the tax financial advisor components from the TASA legislation and moving that into the Corporations Act, and then ASIC will have expanded powers under the ASIC legislation. So one thing that has been talked about is making sure that there's proper representation from tax professionals within that FSCP, so that disciplinary panel, to make sure that when they're looking at disciplinary matters that are involving taxation, that there's an appropriate professional that's involved in that within that panel.
Very good, thank you. Well, so much. Obviously, that's a moving piece again. So much to see how well that turns out. Tracey, thanks for coming on and chatting us today. Tell us about how somebody can get hold of you or have conversations with the association moving forward.
Yeah, so certainly feel free to contact us through our submissions at smsfassociation.com. If you've got any feedback on anything that's open for consultation, or indeed you have any concerns about something that's happening out there that we need to be aware of from an advocacy point of view, that's probably the best port of call. As always, go to the SMSF Association website. I'll certainly ring through to the head office in Adelaide. You can track me down that way. But always love hearing from people on the ground, because that's just so important to keep in touch with what's impacting people in business.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tracey, so much. I really appreciate you coming in and chatting with us today and giving us a really good insight of what's going on in the association.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Fraser.
There you have it, another episode of the XY Advisor podcast. Fraser Jack here. I'm joined by Emily Blanche. Hello.
Hello, Fraser. Let's get stuck into some shout-outs. My favourite time of the week.
Let's do the shout-outs. Yep. Where you go?
All right. Today, we have a dual shout-out to XY legends, Kelly Harris in the Sunshine Coast and Daniel Thompson in Wollongong. Both legends facilitate a local group on the platform for advisors local in Sunshine Coast and also for advisors in Wollongong. And they use it as a place to organise the occasional get-together and meet up with the other XYs in that location. So I know Kelly recently organised a lunch with the Sunshine Coast crew, and I know Daniel is in the midst of organising a get-together for the Wollongong tribe. So if you are in either of those locations, you can definitely join the group and come along to one of the events. And I guess if you're in a location that hasn't got a group on the platform, but you'd like to kickstart bit of a local meetup, getting local XYs together to shoot the breeze and catch up over a breakfast or dinner or a coffee or a beer, let me know. We can definitely organise that for you. But yeah, shout out to Kelly and Daniel. Great to see some community engagement to kick off some face-to-face stuff.